Welcome back to Combat Mission Battle for Normandy, where I'm going to be taking a crack at the Scottish Corridor campaign, focusing on a couple of battalions in the 15th Scottish Division during Operation Epsom. It's another campaign by the excellent Paper Tiger, and it's somewhat similar to the Road to Montaberg, but British and, except by all accounts, a bit tougher. A factor in this extra difficulty is the lower firepower of the British infantry compared to their American counterparts, and seeing as though I made a video about the British Infantry Company and how it wasn't as bad as people think, I should probably put my money where my mouth is. The campaign itself is part of the fighting around Caen on the east side of the Allied beachhead. Caen was an important road hub that the Allies had hoped to capture straight off the beach on June the 6th, but had run into elements of 21st Panzer Division instead and lost momentum. Fast forward to June 26th, and the British are launching a major attack to the west of the city, aimed at crossing the River Odon and outflanking it. This is not only obviously a step to securing Caen, but an exercise in keeping the pressure up on the Germans. Both sides are trying to build up their forces in Normandy, the Allies by sea and the Germans by land, and to slow the Germans down, the Allies have systematically bombed out the French transport network and are busy exploiting their air superiority to harass the advancing reinforcements with fighter bombers. Rommel, still in command at this point, is trying to mass these slowly accumulating reinforcements for a major counterattack into the beachhead. And one of the secondary objectives of Operation Epsom is to force him to commit these forces to the defensive battle instead, wasting their counterattacking potential. We're going to be swapping between two units in this campaign, both from 15th Scottish Division. C and D companies of the 9th Cameronians in 46th Highland Brigade, and B and C companies of the 2nd Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders from 227th Highland Brigade. Neither of these battalions have any combat experience, and on day one, the Cameronians are attacking on the right edge of the British offensive towards the village of Haut-du-Bosq. This not only means the battalion has the furthest to go to get to its objective because it's on the outside of 15th Scottish Division's attacking arc, but because preliminary operations by 49th West Riding Division earlier have not been as successful as hoped, and the Cameronians are attacking with their flank exposed to German forces on the Rauray Spur south of Fontenay-le-Pesnel. As a result, the infantry and their supporting Churchills from 7 Royal Tank Regiment come under effective artillery fire on their advance to Le Haut-du-Bosq and get bogged down in extensive German minefields. With A and B companies in the lead taking heavy casualties on the approach, and most of the tanks seriously delayed, it falls to C and D companies to assault the objective. Le Haut-du-Bosq has been strong-pointed by troops of the 12th SS Hitlerjugend Division, and our job is to clear them out and secure two objectives: Nieps, a farm complex on the right, and Tatties, the edge of the village on the left. These ground objectives are worth 100 points each. There are a further 200 on the table for destroying the enemy and a final 100 for keeping friendly casualties below 20%. Or in short, the aim here is to grab 2 chunks of ground on either side of the map and hammer the enemy, all without getting mauled in the process, and we've got a time limit of 1 hour, plus a bit of variable extra time. To get the job done, we've got C and D companies. These are advancing with 2 platoons up and 1 platoon following. C Company is beginning the battle with its Company HQ, 13 and 14 platoons on map, with 15 platoon arriving in 10 minutes. D Company starts with 16 and 17 platoons on map, to be followed after 15 minutes by its Company HQ and 18 platoon. The organisation of the platoons is a little non-standard. They each have an extra attached Bren team, and each platoon's Piat is attached as a separate team instead of being integrated into one of the sections. Backing the Cameronians up, we also have 2 Churchills from C Squadron 7 Royal Tank Regiment that have made it through. The Squadron HQ, which is a Mark V armed with a 95mm howitzer for close support, and 12 Troop HQ, which is a standard Mark VI armed with a 75mm gun. Also worth noting with the Churchills is that they each have coaxial and full-mounted base and machine guns and 9,000 rounds of ammunition for them. In terms of off-map support, there is a platoon of 4 25-pounders on call, with 140 rounds of high explosive and 40 rounds of smoke, but the battalion 3-inch mortars are unavailable because they're being harassed by enemy artillery as they move up, and the weather precludes any air support. The weather is making things pretty miserable for everybody, to be honest. It's raining with some light fog, and it's been raining long enough for the ground to become muddy. The briefing specifically notes that vehicles are very likely to get bogged if they stray off-road, which is definitely something to think about as I'm looking at the terrain. The village is on top of a slight slope, behind a central orchard surrounded by fields. The left side of the village, and Tatties in particular, is fairly close terrain with plenty of houses and gardens, while the right mostly consists of another orchard with the Neeps farm behind it. The single gravel track leading up to the village from my deployment zone runs up the right side of the first orchard before turning left along a stretch of bocage to link into the more extensive road net in the village. On the surface, that might restrict my options with the Churchills if I want to avoid getting them bogged in the muddy fields, but on closer inspection, I'm not sure it makes all that much difference. They might be able to help my infantry break into the village by suppressing or destroying German positions on the edge, but the village interior is masked from the outside by a combination of tall bocage and the crest of the slope. Actually bringing the Churchills into the village seems risky given the dense terrain, short engagement ranges, and the high possibility of encountering Panzerschrecks and Panzerfausts. In fact, the left side of the village looks pretty intimidating in general, so if Tatties is on the menu, it might be dessert rather than the main course. Neeps, on the other hand, looks more immediately appetising. Once my infantry are up to the bocage in front of it, they're one short company attack through an orchard and some allotments away. Granted, the Churchills won't be able to come with them, but it's not too far from that track to the bocage line, so if they run into difficulty, it might not be too risky to try and get one of the tanks into the firing line to beef them up. With Neeps secure, I can think about hooking in behind Tatties or attacking it from two directions at once. So the plan, in short, is that C Company will attack Objective Neeps, supported in the first phase by the Churchills on the road, while D Company will occupy the first orchard to spot and fix enemy defenders on the edge of Tatties. I'll decide whether and how to attack Tatties as the battle progresses. This leads on to the artillery. The 25-pounders have a calibre of 88mm, so while they have plenty of ammunition, the downside is that they're pretty light, and I'm probably going to have to expend a lot of ammunition to achieve anything. Or, to put it another way, I'm thinking my artillery is going to be most effectively used for a single mission. The question then is, what to use it for? If I'm going to attack Neeps first, would it be best to hit the farm complex so that C Company has an easier time? Or would it be best to use the artillery to keep up a steady fire on Tatties so that, in the event that I don't go for that objective, I've still inflicted some casualties on any German defenders there and hopefully kept them suppressed? Alternatively, do I use it to pulverise the edge of the village, either right or left, in order to smash the first line of defence that's likely set up in that hedgerow? These are all mostly sensible options, but in the end I've decided to target the entrance to Tatties. This is somewhat of a halfway house, but I think that C Company should be able to deal with Neeps on their own, and that the dense terrain on either side of the road leading into Tatties is both a target-rich environment and my immediate concern for getting the tanks in there. If the first 100 metres has been cleared by artillery, I'll be a lot more confident about trying to gain a toehold there, and the Churchills will have some safety space, assuming, obviously, that it works. Kicking the battle off, I have a couple of detached scout teams moving up as the 25-pounders start to come in. One team on the right to probe the way forward for C Company, and another on the left from D Company, plus that company's sniper team leading the way into the orchard. It's not long until the Germans start taking pot shots and the first casualties go down. There look to be a handful of machine guns in the centre hedgerow, plus a sniper team out on the right, and a wooden machine gun bunker at the crossroads. Worse, the orchard is blocking a lot less line of sight than I thought it would do, allowing a German light machine gun team at the crossroads to fire through it at some of C Company's infantry on the other side. The orchard is clear, at least, so I can move the Churchills up to get a better view and start brassing up the hedgerows. This quickly accounts for the sniper, apparently paving the way on the right flank, only for a couple of mortar bombs to drop in. Trying to advance across that long wheat field with oblique machine gun fire coming in from one flank and 81mm high explosive bombs raining in from above doesn't sound like a good move, so I try to move more infantry into the orchard and get some fire down on that centre hedgerow, while the Churchill 75 supports and the Churchill 95 takes on the bunker with its howitzer. There isn't any fire coming in from the front of Tatties, except from the bunker, which would suggest that the 25-pounders are doing their job of suppressing the enemy over there, but with the central German machine gun teams apparently refusing to give up even when my sections pour 303 and 2-inch mortar bombs into them, it's starting to feel a bit like an episode of the War Room. I'm starting to wonder if I've dropped the barrage in the wrong place, leaving my infantry with an unsupported struggle. As if that wasn't bad enough, some of my infantry spot a Pak 40 75mm gun right in the corner of the bocage at the crossroads, probably because it just fired and missed the Churchill 75. On the next turn, the Pak immediately gets on target and scores a penetration on the turret, killing the gunner. The tank pops smoke and reverses, while the other Churchill puts a 95mm HE shell directly onto the Pak's position, but it gets a second shot off anyway, and that penetrates the front hull, knocking out the engine and killing the driver. To add insult to injury, a chunk of something flies off the impact and kills one of the soldiers in the orchard as well. The Pak crew at least has the courtesy to go to ground after this, and I guess the Churchill 75 managed to reverse off the road before getting immobilised, so the other tank doesn't have to detour around it and risk getting bogged, but these are pretty thin silver linings in a bleak cloud. But after keeping the fire up for a few turns, the right starts to look pretty clear, and with a bit of 2-inch mortar smoke, I'm able to get 13 platoons, 2 lead sections up to the bocage line, despite suffering another quick stomp from the enemy mortars. Stacking the hedgerow reveals German infantry in the farm buildings up ahead, more in the allotments out in front, and, as if that wasn't enough, a second machine gun bunker out on the far right. 2 depleted sections isn't enough to deal with all this, but the rest of 13 platoon is following them up, and with the Pak apparently suppressed, I'm sending the Churchill 95 to help out. As a bonus, the other tank can see the German bunker at the crossroads from where it got immobilised and takes it out with a 75mm AP shell, so at least there's less to worry about on the other flank while I take a run at Neeps. This mostly consists of maintaining an indecisive firefight up at the hedgerow while I feed in more troops. There's a lopsided balance of firepower here. There are at least 4 German machine guns up ahead, and while they're able to overcome the comparatively anemic fire from my British sections, I have enough small teams that they can't suppress all of them all the time, and I'm able to hang in the fight. I've also remembered what I learned way back in the Hell in the Hedgerows mission from the Road to Montabaur campaign, and I've made sure that 13 platoons Piat is close at hand. The machine gun bunker on the right is just at the edge of Piat range, 158 metres, but the gunner nails it on the second try and wipes out the occupants. This is good news, and might have opened up the right map edge, but I don't think I'm in a position to exploit it until I've won the firefight with the allotments and the farm buildings. The Churchill 95 has arrived though, and it starts to blast everything with high explosive and hose down German positions with machine gun fire, allowing 13 platoons firing line to get back on its feet and, reinforced, start to gain that all-important fire superiority. Once I'm confident the Germans have their heads down, I move up an assault team from one section to flank and finish them. The section leader goes down, but the 3 survivors carry on, get into position, and get the job done. There are still German teams in the farmhouse, but with the base of fire keeping their heads down and one section's Bren group now passing the assault team to form a cut-off element, I've got a borderline textbook building clearance set up and ready to go. That doesn't mean I'm going to storm the place until the Churchill has sent another few 95mm high explosive shells in though, and by the time my assault element makes a move, consisting of the one section assault team and the expended platoon 2-inch mortar team and their Sten gun, the building is already empty. The Germans have all died where they fought. Meanwhile, I'm not inclined to advance on the left at all, instead maintaining a firing line that's trading shots with Panzer Grenadiers up in the buildings, and, because of course it's not dead yet, the Pak 40. This puts another round into the Churchill 75, though the penetration thankfully doesn't inflict any meaningful extra damage. The gun needs to go, though, along with whatever German infantry are left in that central hedgerow, so I detach a section off of 14 Platoon, which is following up 13 Platoon in their attack on Nieps, to go and sort them out. This section doesn't have a fun time. Although the Bocage is clear, almost all the way up to the crossroads, they take fire from enemy machine guns up in the Tatties buildings, and then come face to face with the MG-34 toting ammo bearer team for the Pak at point blank range. The result is a couple of casualties and no progress, with soldiers from both sides cowering on either side of the hedgerow and occasionally trading shots. In the end, I push more of 14 Platoon up, suppressing the houses from the Bocage while I send an assault team through a gap to the other side to enfilade the AT gun position. A bit of rifle fire and some squirts from the Sten solved the problem. By this point, I've cleared Nieps and destroyed the German forces in the centre hedgerow, but although I have some elements forward, soon to be joined by the Churchill 95, the bulk of my force isn't really in position to exploit. This is somewhat conscious. Assaulting Tatties was always pretty low on my to-do list given the defensive advantage in that kind of terrain, and the avenues of approach to it still feel problematic, but I've deliberately held my infantry back to keep them spread out, and the result is that even if I wanted to make a move now, I don't think I can really bring a useful amount of manpower to bear before the timer runs down. I do have 13 Platoon up at Nieps though, and after a few minutes going door to door in the objective to make sure it's clear, I can certainly afford to leave a couple of men to secure it, and send the rest out looking for trouble. Pushing towards the centre of the map, mostly with the intent of bringing fire to bear on Tatties from another angle, reveals a German mortar section in a trench. It doesn't take much to almost wipe them out with enfilade fire at close range, which prompts the AI to throw in the towel. This was somewhat unexpected, but as the endgame screen reveals, they only have 15 men still alive. Having lost 35 dead and 24 wounded, I, on the other hand, have lost 17 and 20 respectively, plus the Churchill 75 immobilised. The Germans have surrendered, so I win by default, but I had certainly cleared out Nieps and kept my casualties below 20%, so I would probably have won at this point even if the game had simply timed out. This was pretty tough. A quick survey of the map reveals that almost all resistance came from small dispersed teams based primarily around machine guns. Factor in the expected high motivation of the SS, and the defenders here had a nasty combination of hard to spot, hard to suppress, and small target. These little teams, especially those behind Bocage, were really hard to deal with British infantry sections alone, especially at longer ranges. My biggest problem really felt like advancing up that field on the right, because it was subject to oblique fire from enemy machine guns in the centre. I think recognising the vulnerability of the right field to that oblique fire earlier, and making a more focused effort to smoke up the incoming fire angles might have been a good move. So from here on out, I really need to remember to use smoke where I can to help close the range. Once the range had closed, like in the fight for Nieps, however, while things didn't necessarily become more even per se, those British sections were also hard for the Germans to deal with in return. A hedgerow full of riflemen popping up and snapping a few shots off before getting suppressed may not win a firefight, but they can certainly stay in a firefight and keep enemy units fixed in place until other assets, in this case mostly the Churchill 95 but also a Piat and a 2-inch mortar, can join in. Worth noting is that in the end, most of the Germans firing from the upper floors of Tatties were out of action too, so the kind of longer term persistent small arms fire kept up by the sections was actually a lot more effective than it looked. The other key element here was the artillery. I already mentioned that at one point this sort of felt like it might be starting to be the war room infantry artillery coordination experience, so did I drop the artillery in the wrong place? Was smashing up the forward edge of Tatties a bad move? I probably wouldn't go so far as calling it a bad move outright. Overall, the 25 pounders admittedly only accounted for 7 out of 59 enemy casualties, but they did destroy or drive off both a heavy machine gun team and a sniper team on the left, both of which could have been problematic, and inflicted a couple of casualties on German troops in the buildings. It probably also did a lot to suppress them at the start of the game, which was really helpful, and the dispersed nature of the German defence here means that a high casualty count was perhaps not on the cards anyway. But despite not being terrible, I think I could clearly have integrated the 25-pounders a lot better than I did. Expending them on the centre hedgerow would have probably been much more useful, not least if the AT gun had been taken out, and the other option I toyed with of hitting a linear barrage running from the right hedgerow through the allotments and onto the farmhouse building at Neeps would have been borderline perfect. It's interesting how I thought about both of those options and then discarded them to essentially spread my effort onto Tatties, the objective I wasn't really going to attack, instead of concentrating all my assets on the objective that I chose to. One day I may remember to actually coordinate my artillery effectively. Speaking of coordination, the other option I never actually considered was using the 2 forward observers, one attached to each company, to simply direct the 25-pounders where I needed them. Granted, they have a 10-minute call-in time that seems extremely slow after playing the modern combat mission games, but that's 10 minutes I can be probing forward, preparing and getting into position to exploit. Holding off on the attack once it was clear the centre hedgerow was going to be problematic was not really going to be a problem, especially as it took me a good 20 minutes to beat it down enough to advance on the right without the artillery. So I also need to think about being actually flexible with my artillery instead of going full war room myself and scripting my artillery based on my best guess. This naturally has its limits. Calling a fire mission down on Neeps or the allotments once the game had started would have been very difficult because of line of sight and enemy proximity issues, but a bit more judicious, sensible employment of my artillery is not going to be rocket science. Regardless, the Cameronians are into Haut-du-Bosq with relatively light casualties, and I'm now armed with a handful of lessons learned to do better in the next mission. Hope you all enjoyed this and found it interesting. I'll catch you in the next video.